The last few years have been some of the most volatile in history for U.S. agriculture. We'll take a look at the past year and forecast for the next. If you farm or if you eat, join us as we take a look back and a look ahead next on Show Me Ag. Welcome to Show Me Ag. I'm your host, Kyle Vickers. Uncertainty has always been a part of agriculture, but maybe now more than ever. Global economics are making things extremely volatile, with grain prices and livestock setting record highs recently. To explain what's going on in the market, we have with us one of the foremost authorities on agriculture economics in the nation, Patrick Westhoff, director of the Food and Agriculture Policy Institute, commonly known as FAPRI. As director, he and his associates track worldwide agriculture trends for the U.S. government and private business, and we have some questions about where things are headed. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it. The year started off kind of tough for farmers in the Midwest last year, but it ended up pretty good.
Yeah, we're looking at probably record levels of farm income last year in 2013. Kind of a surprise to a lot of us going into the year after the worst drought in decades.
So we had a report came out recently. Turned out pretty good yields, a lot of corn left over.
That's right, a big increase in corn production in 2013. So we're looking at corn production almost back to the trend level of yields with all the acres we planted last spring. It's the most corn ever.
And a lot of that corn is still in grain bins to be strung out over the next year or so.
That's right. We're going to have a lot more corn on hand at the end of this marketing year than we had at the beginning.
So that's a good thing in some ways, moderates prices a little bit. What about soybeans, a big crop in Missouri?
Soybeans, another bigger crop in Missouri. Not as big of an increase in soybeans as we had in corn, but still a big increase in production statewide and national as well.
Okay, let's go back to, that's kind of the aggregate picture. Did Missouri fare as well as the rest of the country?
It was a bigger recovery in Missouri, especially in corn. And we had terrible corn yields here in Missouri in 2012. Just 75 bushels an acre was a statewide average. Last year's yield much closer to the long-term trend here in Missouri.
So we kind of recovered, had a better summer than expected.
That's right.
What about the cattle market? I think has been at record highs over the past few days.
That's right.
That's a big crop here in Missouri, is our cattle business.
That's right. Cattle have had lots of good things happen to them, with a little bit less supplies out there because of reduced animal numbers, with better forage conditions we'd like to hope going forward, with cheaper corn that'll make feeder calves worth more. That combination has been very good for feeder calf producers here in Missouri.
And that'll be good for the economy of Missouri to have all those things sort of recovering.
That's right, especially for cattle producers. Yeah.
Let's take a look ahead then. I know you guys are working on forecasts, but having some trouble getting things all pinned down. Are we looking at another big record acreage of corn, do you think?
Not sure we'll have a record level of acreage in 2014, but we'll probably have another big acreage year. We do see lower prices for corn right now. That'll probably cause at least a few people to shift their planting plans in 2014, but still lots of acres planted.
That ratio of corn price to soybean price is a pretty big deal, isn't it?
That's right, and we've had very high soybean prices relative to corn prices in recent weeks. As we look forward for the 2014 crop, expectations those markets will get a little bit more in line with each other again.
So where are we going to end up in terms of the actual price, this marketing year average, and then what do you project?
Sure, USDA has estimated the average corn price for the current marketing year at about $4.40 a bushel. For soybeans, in about the $12.50 or $12.75 range for the current marketing year. For the crop we're going to harvest in 2014, on the other hand, if we have average yields, and unless demand's a lot stronger than we anticipate, we can expect prices to be even lower.
Lower than that 440
That's
average.
Right.
So we're seeing a downtrend from $7 or $8 here a year or so ago. So that's a pretty significant drop, which can cause some problems down the road. You mentioned soybeans, almost 3 times the price of corn. That's an unusual ratio. What do you see for soybeans?
Yeah, for 2014, we'd expect the soybean price to come down to somewhere in the $10 range, more than likely. So that's a lot more normal relationship to corn than we've had this past few months.
It seems like watching the markets every day, as I do, that there's a lot of volatility created by other places in the world, which we didn't really deal with maybe a decade or two ago. Tell us a little bit about China and where they're headed.
Sure, China has been the major source of demand for soybeans in particular, but agricultural commodities in general. They've changed their diets dramatically over the last several decades, and they'll continue to change their diets as incomes rise in that country. How much more they will continue to increase meat and poultry and dairy consumption is one of the big question marks going forward. The other question, of course, is how much can they produce themselves? They've increased production a lot, but to keep up with the growing demand from the livestock sector, they need to do a lot more domestically or import more than they already are importing.
And that is generally to improve their protein consumption, which can be meat or other proteins, but that really is a bigger impact on the soybean market than...
Yeah, so far that's what we've seen so far, because until now China has decided they're going to try to retain as much self-sufficiency in corn and wheat and rice as they possibly can, but in soybeans they don't seem to care, and so they've imported by far and away most of the soybeans they consume domestically, and they are the largest player by far in world markets.
A little bit ironic, if I'm not mistaken, our soybeans were originally a product of China, but now we're exporting to China more than they're producing.
That's right. As recently as about 25 years ago, China was more or less self-sufficient in soybeans. Now they import far, far, far more than they produce domestically.
Well, let's talk about another area of the world that's concerned is South America. Big competitors now in corn and soybeans and all kinds of commodities.
That's right. We've seen big increases in production. Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, other countries in the region. One of the questions as we go forward, if prices are a bit lower now in 2014 and beyond, is that going to cause them to at least scale back their expansion plans from what they would have been otherwise?
They're in the middle of their crop year. Are they at record acreage and maximizing their production this year?
We do expect to see a big increase in production in both Argentina and Brazil in 2014. Still early to determine how big the crop will really prove to be, as weather will be important in the weeks ahead.
What about some, I hate to call them minor crops, but rice, cotton, those are big issues for Missouri as well.
Right. Cotton is one where we've seen prices be maybe a bit better than we might have anticipated a year ago, but that's because we had a very terrible crop of cotton in this country in 2013. As we look to 2014 and beyond, one of the big question marks is again China. China is holding huge stocks of cotton right now. If they were to bring those stocks down to more normal levels, more consistent with how much they actually consume, that could cause a lot lower cotton prices ahead of us.
And how about rice?
Rice is an important crop, of course, here in Missouri and elsewhere as well. Rice markets have done relatively well. We've kept rice prices higher than we have prices, say, for corn. We haven't seen the kind of drop we've seen for corn so far.
I wanted to mention rice because a lot of people don't realize that Missouri is a pretty significant rice grower, aren't they?
We are indeed a significant rice producer here in the state. One of the concerns going forward is that the prices for Vietnamese rice, for Thai rice, are much lower than prices in this country right now. Will that mean lower prices ahead for here is a major question mark going forward?
Let's look a little bit at livestock and poultry. We talked a little bit about the beef market. Lowest cattle numbers, which our area of Missouri is the cow-calf central. Right. Where are we headed in the future on these cattle markets?
Yeah, we have a lot fewer cows, a lot fewer calves out there right now, not just in Missouri but nationwide. So unless there's a huge surprise, a negative surprise on demand, we're probably going to have pretty strong beef prices and pretty strong feeder calf prices for the next couple of years. Eventually people will respond to those high prices and we'll see an expansion of herds, but that takes time to happen.
Been so much devastation due to the weather throughout cow country that it's going to be hard to rebuild that herd, isn't it?
Right, it will take some time, clearly. We have a lot of damage, not just here in Missouri, but all the way down to Texas in terms of lost animals and bad forage conditions the past several years.
When I was in college, Glenn Grimes said that the #1 factor in the beef market was consumer incomes. So if that is true, that's holding up beef prices to some degree. As the economy improves, will that also help the beef market?
Sure. As the U.S. economy improves, that will be a positive for not just beef, but for all the livestock sectors. And it's not just the U.S. economy. You know, we're exporting increasing shares of our beef, pork, and chicken overseas. So as overseas economies do well, consumers overseas can also buy some of those products.
A lot of the poultry and swine are under contract. Maybe not the volatility in prices doesn't affect as many people, but there's still quite a bit of impact in Missouri for poultry and swine prices as well. Where are those headed?
Right. For swine, one of the big question marks is disease. We have a disease right now in the pork industry that's causing lots of young pigs to die. We're still trying to get a handle on just how bad this is really going to prove to be, how many animals are really going to lose. If it weren't for that disease, we'd probably have increased production and lower prices for pork in 2014. We'll see, though, because of the disease, maybe that won't be what plays out in practice. In terms of poultry, we saw a big increase in poultry prices last year. This year, with lower feed prices, we'll probably see an increase in poultry production and a bit of a pullback in prices.
You mentioned the swine. Is that does the weather have an impact on that disease, or is that just something that's going through the industry?
It's just going through the industry as far as I'm aware. I don't think it's tied to the
Okay.
weather.
The weather's had a big impact. I mean, we've gone through some pretty volatile weather situations over the past couple of years. Really makes it hard to predict where things are going to be with the weather as changeable as it is.
That's right. So when I talked to you about a projected corn price for 2014, maybe something like $4 a bushel, well, that's contingent on having an average weather year. Clearly, if we have a breakout year to the positive side, we could have prices that start with a 3 very easily for a corn price. On the other hand, if we were to have anything remotely resembling the kind of situation we had in 2012, prices would be a lot higher again.
People talk about the trend yield. I think this year the yield was pinned at about 158. Is that right?
That's right.
That's just amazing to me in my lifetime where that yield has gone. Our potential yield's way up there, isn't it?
That's right. We've seen huge increases over the last 20, 30 years. The average rate of gain in yields nationwide is about 2 bushels per acre per year.
Wow, that doesn't sound like much, 2 bushels per acre, but over time that's
up.
pretty significant,
Yes,
isn't
it
it?
is.
So we're looking at pretty volatile export markets. This is an interesting thing to me that just came out a couple weeks ago. They announced that Cheerios will be made with non-GMO products. Europe has still got some issues about GMOs. American consumers may have. Does that impact our markets as well?
It does have an impact. There are certain markets we can't sell certain things to already today. As you indicated, Europe doesn't buy many GMO-containing products, at least not for human consumption. In this country, there's also quite a few people who are seeking out non-GMO products if at all possible. Cheerios was not that difficult to do because there's not that many GMOs in the things you make Cheerios from.
Yeah.
But whether that becomes more common elsewhere will be very important as we go forward.
I know a lot of the farmers I've talked to, and I'm going through my budgets for next year. One of the things that does look like may help us is that costs are falling a little bit,
right,
which is a little unusual because it seems like we've kind of been in a system where all the costs were going up. Seed is still very high. Fertilizer. Tell us about the cost structure for producers this year.
Sure. The big increase we've seen in natural gas production in this country is finally starting to pay some dividends to crop producers. So that natural gas is the main thing we use to make nitrogen fertilizer. So with lower prices for the last several years for natural gas, that's allowed us to come in now, increase our production of nitrogen fertilizer, translating to lower prices. Potash and phosphorus prices have also pulled back a bit now. So all the way around, we were seeing better prices from a producer standpoint for fertilizer in 2014.
One of John Phipps, who's a commentator that some people watch, he keeps talking about the seed corn cartel. There's still a lot of cost push on seed, especially on corn. That's part of the yield increase that you mentioned earlier, that growth in yield, isn't it?
Yeah, the average cost per acre of seed these days is about $100 an acre now for the typical corn farmer. That's a lot more than it was a few years ago. Farmers have been willing to pay that much because they aren't getting increased yields and they're seeing value for what they've paid. As we go forward, if we do indeed have lower corn prices for the next several years, one important question will be how much are farmers willing to pay for seed in the future?
Just a personal anecdote here. When I started farming, it's been almost 40 years ago now, we planted a bag of seed, would take us through about 5 acres, and a bag cost about $20 or $25. The seed corn I'm ordering now, we get a little over 2 acres out of, and we're paying almost $300 for that bag of seed corn. So we're really paying for those GMO products that hopefully will improve and give us that kind of yield increase.
Right, right.
Well, I talked about uncertainty. One of the big things that affect uncertainty is the government. Government regulations, government farm program. You guys are dealing with the House and Senate right now in looking at the Farm Bill, and it keeps getting pushed forward. We're now under a 1940s law because the old law or the other law expired. Expound on that a little bit and help our viewers and me understand where we're at.
Sure. The Farm Bill, as you and I talked, the Farm Bill debate is still going on. There's only some hope of wrapping up a conference agreement very soon and then having a vote by the full House and the full Senate. Timing of that is by no means clear. Even if it's going to happen, it's not entirely clear right now. You are correct that because we did not manage to pass a new Farm Bill by January 1st, we are already under some provisions of the 1949 Farm Act. So among other things, this implies that the support price for milk is supposed to be $37 per hundredweight today. USDA is not enforcing that right now because there's hopes of getting an agreement on a new Farm Bill very quickly. But if they can't get one very soon, they'll have to start acting as if they're trying to enforce this old 1949 law.
Put it in perspective, $36 you said for
$37 is the support
37
price, yeah.
with the support price, and the actual price of milk today is around 15 or 16.
It is below
So
20.
more
yeah.
than double if that
Right.
law would take effect.
Right.
Very volatile. Now they're looking at some dramatic changes in our farm policy. I know there's a lot of we've been getting direct payments, which are an outgrowth of something past 10 years ago, even though we've been having record prices. Now they're going to take away those direct payments at a time when we may be facing lower prices. Is there anybody is there anybody making a plan here?
Sure. The bills passed by both the House and the Senate would indeed eliminate the direct payment program, and eliminate a couple of other farm subsidy programs that farmers have gotten used to over the last decade. In the place of those old programs, a couple of new programs would be created. One of them is likely to be based on prices, so if the price falls below a trigger level, farmers would get a payment. Another program would be based on revenues. So if the revenue per acre, how much you get price times yield, is lower than recent average, then you would get a payment. And farmers will probably have the opportunity to choose between these two programs.
It seems like almost all farmers today are taking the crop insurance, federal supported crop insurance program. It's been a lifesaver for us here in Missouri as we've had some of these bad crops. It's kept a lot of us afloat through some pretty tough times. There's been some talk that crop insurance program, which is admittedly subsidized by the federal government, there'd be a lot of dollars pulled out of that. Is that likely to happen?
There's been discussion of that, but the actual bills that have been passed by the House and Senate don't do that. I mean, so far we're looking at actually maintaining most existing crop insurance programs, in fact, even creating some new ones. Both bills would create a new policy that you could buy on top of your conventional crop insurance that would cover smaller losses than you would normally be able to have covered by crop insurance.
That's the sort of shallow loss program that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is all tied up with a lot of discussion, especially in the House, about food stamps.
Right.
Last fall, there was a lot of discussion. There's been some big cuts in food stamp programs at a time when there's unemployed people and so on. That seems pretty callous.
There's a big difference between the two bills that were passed by the House and Senate. The Senate bill only made very small changes at the margin and really just one major part of the food stamp program. Would save an estimated roughly $4 billion over the next 10 years. That's less than 1% of the cost of the food stamp program that's expected. House bill, on the other hand, would have cut about $39 billion over that same period of time, 10 times as much as the Senate bill. Rumors we're hearing is that a final conference agreement may have cuts that are much smaller than in the House bill, much closer to the Senate bill level.
I know this has been a bone of contention that the food stamps and the feeding programs are even a part of the farm bill. You've worked in the Senate. Tell us a little bit of how the politics works there, that you have food stamps tied with farm policy.
Yeah, going back to the 1970s, those two have been married together. Sometimes some people see it as a marriage of convenience because it has been a way to try to attract both urban and rural votes to get a farm bill legislation passed. This current farm bill cycle has gotten more complicated, obviously. We've seen the food stamp provisions not being terribly helpful in the House in getting a bill done. But at the same time, in the Senate, it appears that it would be very difficult to pass farm legislation that was not accompanied with the nutrition programs as well. And the president's indicated he would not sign a bill that doesn't include both.
So they're going to kind of insist on tying them together. I know there's folks in the House tried to completely split them apart, which would make it kind of hard to pass some farm legislation, would it not?
Yeah, that's the concern people have, is that without the two tied together, there might not be sufficient votes to pass either one.
This whole farm bill situation is pretty complicated. I know you're following it every day. It seems like in the past we had sort of a farm state coalition that would come up with a plan. Lots more people involved in the whole process, aren't there?
There are a lot of people involved in the process. It's not just the farm commodity groups involved in the farm bill process anymore. Not sure that was really the case for quite some time now, but it's certainly got to be more extremely the case today.
And it seems like there's kind of commodities being played off against one another, Midwest versus Southern. That's been part of the history as well, hasn't it?
Right. That's definitely been part of the history, but it's been very much front and center the last few months.
So what's your prediction as to when a farm bill will be passed and we'll have something settled?
I suspect by the time your viewers will see this show, they'll have more information than I have sitting here talking to you. But I do think there's a good chance we'll get something done this month. But there's also a chance that if it doesn't get done this month, that it could lag for quite some time. There may be a chance of a 1 or 2 year extension if they can't wrap a program up very quickly.
One of the concerns that a lot of folks have in this area is the conservation programs, CRP and things like EQIP. Are those going to continue to be funded?
Yeah, I think so. The bills passed by both houses would continue those programs. A little bit of a cutback in the number of acres that can be enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program. A little bit of limitation on spending on some of the other programs, but they do continue more or less as they are today.
So there's a lot of acres currently in CRP. Have a lot of CRP Conservation Reserve Program, have a lot of those acres have accounted for the increase in acres in corn and soybeans, haven't they?
That's right. Yeah, we saw a sharp reduction in Conservation Reserve acres over the last 10 years or so. Those acres might be stabilizing or even increasing again if legislation allows that to occur. Under the bills passed by House and Senate, you could not increase acreage in the CRP from current levels.
I know you folks not only look at agriculture, but the whole macroeconomic picture is a part of it. There's just seems like conflicting signals all the time about whether the overall economy is improving as much as we'd like to see. What are you folks seeing in that regard?
Yeah, I think a lot of people expect 2014 to be a better year than the last 2 or 3 years have been. Economic growth may be picking up to 3% or so. A lot of us are feeling very good about the macroeconomy until some recent reports came out suggesting that maybe we didn't create as many jobs as we thought we had in December of last year. So all of us will be watching very carefully as new employment reports, new reports come out about the overall state of the economy.
Especially when it comes to the meat market, those unemployment figures are pretty significant, aren't they?
That's right, that's right. People eat a lot less steak when they don't have money in their pocket than when they do.
One of the big impacts, and we talk about lower costs, one of the big headlines has been land prices and rent prices. Where do you see, I know there's been phenomenal increases in land prices, especially in the better producing areas, Iowa and Illinois and so on. Let's talk a little bit about land prices. Do you see them moderating, or I keep reading that things are going to be pretty strong?
We've seen huge increases, you're absolutely right. In my home state of Iowa, for example, in 2009, the average acre of farm real estate sold for about $4,000 an acre. By January 1st, 2013, that had increased to $8,000 an acre, doubled in just 4 years' time.
4 years. That's
now,
unprecedented, isn't it?
It's amazing, and that pace obviously can't continue forever. Going forward, we have two major sources of concern. The first is that we're seeing much lower returns to crop production than we have been experiencing the last 2 or 3 years, as lower prices translate to lower revenues per acre. And the other thing, of course, is interest rates. So far, interest rates have been very, very low, and we have near zero interest rates at the short-term rates, and even longer-term rates are nothing like they had been a few years ago. If those interest rates eventually pop back up again as the economy strengthens, the combination of higher interest rates and lower returns from crop production could be a very strong negative for land values.
Bound to put some downward pressure. And what about cash rents? I've got friends that are committed to 3 and 5 year rents at pretty high levels. I know in Iowa, $500 or $600 an acre rent was not that uncommon, which seems incredible.
If you have $6 corn, you can do lots of things you cannot do with $4 corn. And there definitely are people who are probably committed to rental arrangements right now who will have a difficulty in 2014 if prices are as low as I expect them to be, as many other people expect them to be.
You guys project out long term. Are we looking at generally healthy agriculture over the next, say, 10 years? Or how far out can we look and say things are pretty solid for American agriculture?
It's all a matter of perspective. If you're pointing comparisons the last couple or 3 years, we do not expect the next 10 years to be nearly as optimistic for crop producers as the last 2 or 3 years have been. Sure, we had the lousy yields in 2012 because of the drought, but those were offset to a large extent by very high prices and by crop insurance benefits. If instead we're talking about $4 corn, $10 soybeans, let's say, over the next decade, that's going to be a lot lower level of income for crop producers than they've been used to the last several years. Compared to pre-2007, on the other hand, those are still very good prices. The other side of the picture is, of course, livestock. With lower crop prices, lower feed prices, we've seen a bit more optimistic picture for livestock sector income in 2014 and beyond.
Let's think about Missouri for a second here. I know you look at the aggregate more than you look just at the state of Missouri, but you're very familiar. Are we pretty solid in Missouri? Do we have a thriving agriculture sector?
I think we have a lot of very strong points in agriculture. The beef sector right now has lots of reasons to be optimistic over the next several years. I think the rest of the livestock sector in general is looking pretty good as well. On the crop side, though, again, we are looking at things not being quite as rosy as they've been the last several years.
One of the things that people my age compare things to the 70s and 80s. I said you sort of learn to time things by decades when you're my age. We had some pretty tough times, and good times in the 70s, tough times in the 80s. Some of my friends say this is going to be a repeat. But farmers' balance sheets, the overall health, financial health of farmers is pretty solid, isn't it?
Right. For the sector as a whole, we have relatively low levels of farm indebtedness right now. So compared to the overall value of farm assets like land, machinery, and the like, we have a very good debt-asset ratio compared to history. So that's a very positive thing. At the same time, though, many commercial operators do have some debt, and they will indeed be exposed should we have a big downturn in prices.
So let's kind of reiterate here. If we're looking at, give us some actual figures. If we're looking at 158 bushel yield next year on how many acres? 90 million or so?
More than 90 million acres. I won't give any exact numbers. I'm not sure I know yet, but
Sure,
more than 90
sure.
million
No,
acres.
I mean that'll all. The interesting thing is we take those crop insurance prices in February.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference to us all, trying to compare those prices and see what our revenues might be and so on. So there'll be a lot of volatility. But we're looking at corn in the mid 4s, and then but a bigger crop, we're looking at the 3s. Any chance if we have a short crop, are we going to be back in the circumstances we were a year or so ago?
Sure, we could be back above $5, even above $6 a bushel with a short enough crop, but it would take a pretty short crop here or some very strong demand picture overseas for that to happen. You know, as I saw a picture recently, somebody showed me of a forecast farmers have made at the Farm Progress Show this past year, and it showed an average farm price of corn 5 years from now of about $6 a bushel. That's awfully optimistic. I mean, that would not be my own expectation of where we're likely to be in the future. And it's not just 2014, but also longer term. We should not assume that what happened last year and the year before is going to repeat.
Well, I think as a farmer, always more optimistic than I should be, and that's what keeps us going, I guess. So that $6 price would seem like a pretty good deal for farmers if we could sustain that over a long period of time.
If it could be done.
Well, I want to thank you for coming tonight, trying to explain this to people. You guys typically go out and do some programs throughout the state or really throughout the country to kind of make some of these forecasts. Do you have some of those scheduled?
Yeah, I've got a few presentations coming up the next few weeks here. It's kind of the meeting season, if you will, both around the state and around the country.
The Ag Week in Missouri is coming right up at the university. You'll be appearing at some of those presentations
as well. That's right.
We thank you for sharing some of these things with us first, and hopefully as the Farm Bill is solved and we get into a little bit farther into the spring, you'll be able to tie these things down a little bit closer. But thank you very much for coming and sharing with us. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. Thanks for being with us and sharing those insights. But that's all the time we have for tonight. Before we go, we'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to Show Me Ag. Be sure to tune in next time for another look at a topic touching rural Missouri. For everyone here at CAMWest and myself, good night. We're also very interested in what you have to say. So if you have feedback you'd like to share with us, you can email us at showmeag@camos.org or find us on Facebook.